From London, we went out into the lovely English countryside to Warwickshire. We were going to Stratford-on-Avon. Our first stop was Shakespeare's birthplace. Stratford looked just the way I'd always thought it would. Mullion windows and half-timbered buildings. Shakespeare learned English in this grammar school. Here we met Mrs. Mary Ann Brown. She had been in charge of one of the historic buildings in Stratford, and now that she was retired, she still liked to talk with visitors. This was another of those delightful little adventures that made every day of our trip so memorable. Mrs. Brown told us how to find the path that Shakespeare took when he went to Shottery to court Anne Hathaway. We picked up our tickets at the Shakespeare Memorial Theater and walked along the romantic Avon. That evening we saw Romeo and Juliet. Next morning we left England on the Channel ferry. The white cliffs of Dover dwindled away in the distance as we headed toward France. We had dinner in the Eiffel Tower restaurant on our last evening abroad. Our tour had wound up with 2 more wonderful days in Paris. Naturally, we were talking about what the trip had meant to each of us. This certificate I'd earned at the Institute in Geneva was something tangible. But just as important, I found new understanding and new interests. They'll make me a better teacher, and I think a more interesting person. Mike had really come out of his shell.
You know, I took this trip to see things. Well, I saw the famous buildings, and I learned a great deal from them. But I also learned a lot about meeting people and having fun with them. Now I realize how much this means to my work. After all, an architect builds houses for people. I'm sure that we all got much more than we expected from our air adventure to Europe.
Blue saltwater inlets reaching far inland to touch the depths of pleasant, deep-cut valleys, which fall off from great heights to the level of the sea. Here live a sturdy, blonde, and blue-eyed people, descendants of the ancient Vikings who discovered America. For more than a score of centuries, they have inhabited this land. Today, as then, a great seafaring and trading nation. But in these modern times, working not only as men of the sea, but as craftsmen and farmers as well. Although hardly more than 5% of the land is under cultivation, due mainly to the rugged topography, farming is the largest industry in Norway, supporting about 1/3 of the country's 3 million population. Men and women share the daily work on the small Norwegian farm, almost 95% of which are owned by the farmers who work them, and whose products are marketed through a very practical system of farm cooperatives. Distinctly a Norwegian product is the fjord pony. Thousands of these ponies, which have stamina comparable to our American mule, are bred for domestic use as well as for export. An interesting farming operation peculiar to Scandinavia is the summer farm. During the few weeks of the summer, when grass grows at the higher altitudes, the valley farmer drives his cattle up to graze. The summer farm is almost always tended by women who milk the cows and make the butter and cheese. Foodstuffs are placed in quaint food storehouses, this one being the property of one family for more than 300 years. The architecture and decorations of the storehouses differ with the section of the country. While the American farmer usually devotes full time to his vocation, in Norway it is quite customary for a man to spend part of his time farming and part-time in the fishing industry. Less than an hour before these scenes were taken, the men seen here stacking dried cod were cutting hay in a nearby field. Developed by the combined efforts of part-time fishermen and the commercial fishing companies, Norway's fishing industry is one of the largest in Europe and among the largest in the world. Although not one of the major industrial nations of the world, Norway offers its people a modern convenience not easily accessible to some of the more highly industrialized countries. Plentiful, low... For Norway, perhaps more than any other country in Europe, has water power which, transformed into electrical energy by hydroelectric power plants, makes available to all towns and most rural districts electricity for light, power, heat, and transport facilities at a cost lower than anywhere else in the world. It is this abundance of low-cost power that is largely responsible for the electrochemical and metallurgical industries that have become so important as factors in the economy of the nation. It is this power that serves Norway's extensive shipyards, where a large percentage of the ships comprising Norway's vast merchant marine are built and repaired, passenger and cargo vessels of every size and description, which carry such a large percentage of the world's tonnage. One thing that always impresses the visitor to Norway is its cleanliness, its modern cities. Situated at the head of a great fjord on the southeastern coast is Oslo, with a population of 400,000, Norway's largest city. Oslo is in the best traditions of European capitals, a city beloved by Norwegian and visitor alike. In the center of the city is the Royal Palace. Although Norway is a monarchy nominally ruled by a hereditary king, it is one of the world's most notable examples of the democratic way of life. The Norwegian takes great pride in his independence, and along with women who share equal voting privileges, he seldom neglects to vote for his choice of representatives to Parliament, known in Norway as the Storting. Norway's second city is Bergen. Long a port of call for seafaring men and commercial traders, Bergen also possesses great cultural interests. It was near here that Edvard Grieg composed much of his music, which is one of Norway's proudest contributions to the world's common property. We visit the fish market, as much a part of Scandinavia as the language itself. To these markets, 6 days a week, 52 weeks of the year, between the hours of 9 and 1, comes the Norwegian housewife to make her selections of the basic of the Norwegian diet, fish.